Okay, so the pulse location, the radial pulse, okay, is found on the thumb side or lateral, which is also considered the outer side of the wrist. Okay, so at the radial pulse, the radial artery is found on the thumb side or lateral, which is also considered outer side of the wrist. Just lateral toward the outside of the wrist. Okay, so, or sorry, of the flexor tendons of the wrist. Flexor tendons of the wrist. Okay, so these are the flexor tendons. I have a video I'll show you in a little bit. So those are the flexor tendons. So they're just lateral to the outside of the wrist, of those flexor tendons of the wrist. So if you make a fist, you should see the tendons pop out. I'll explain that in a little bit here. The pulse location is found with digits 2 and digit number 3. Okay, so digit 2 is commonly called the index finger, and digit 3 is commonly called the middle finger. So if you don't have these notes in front of you and you have to write them down on a separate sheet of paper, what I would do is I would just, because you're not going to be able to write, you may be able to, but most of you may not be able to write as fast all the sentences. So just strategize how you would write the notes down to help you remember, so that when you go back to the recording potentially and you're able to print, or I'm able to get you what you need, or you're able to edit the document online, you actually have the information to do that. Okay, so the importance of being able to identify where to locate the radial pulse. Is important for two reasons. Number one, to determine heart rate, to determine whether heart rate is present in an emergency. And to determine heart rate when exercising. Okay, so to determine whether heart rate is present in an emergency, and then to determine heart rate when exercising. So those are two reasons why we'd want to find pulse. Now, some people say, oh, let's do carotid, put your finger on your neck and check the pulse with the carotid artery. Usually we don't advise to check the pulse on the neck or the carotid artery, because sometimes you can press too hard on that carotid artery, and that artery actually is the artery that supplies blood to the brain, and it can make you feel lightheaded. Time to time, it could technically make you close to passing out. So we don't want that. So usually we say don't take the pulse on the carotid artery or the neck. It's usually taken on the radial artery. Okay, so emergency types, right? So we'll talk about a couple. We said number one, determine whether heart rate is present in an emergency. So here's some emergency types that you would want to be able to take radial pulse on yourself or on a family member or a friend, or this is potentially in a sports medicine situation, but most of the time we take pulse very rarely sports medicine wise. But so number one, a severe bleed. Okay, so any severe bleed, if there's a severe bleed, you want to be able to take pulse to see where that pulse is at, whether it's in range or not. And eventually we'll talk about what that normal ranges are. Okay, heart attacks. Strokes. And this is just a few, right? There's quite a few more. We're just giving the main ones. Severe accidents with internal injuries. That cause shock. Okay, so
could you move the screen down just a little bit?
What's that?
Could you move the screen down just a little bit? So you can't see the bottom part.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
There, you want like that? Is that good?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome. So severe accidents with internal that cause shock. Right, we'll talk about shock later on. There's a lot of different types of shock, but that's just one where we'd want to be able to take pulse. Shock can lead to incoherence, fumbling upon their words, slurring the words, not looking okay, not responding correctly. So we'd want to be able to take a pulse during any type of shock-like situation. So those are just a few. There's quite a few more, but I could list off 20 of them. It wouldn't really make much difference. So I just want you to know that there's a few we'd want to be able to know for sure. Okay, so severe bleeds, heart attack, stroke, severe accidents with internal injuries that cause shock. Okay, so determining heart rate during exercise is important for the following reasons. So we say exercise and emergency types, right? So here's a few reasons why we'd want to take pulse during exercise. So number one, to ensure you or your client does not pass out or get sick due to overexertion. Overexertion's already is already written on there. So due to overexertion, right? So then we say, well, what is overexertion? Okay, so here's the definition, medical definition of overexertion. Physical exertion to a state of abnormal exhaustion. Okay, so physical exertion, let me just write it down here actually. To a state of abnormal exhaustion. Okay, so there's basically your definition of overexertion. Okay, so there's probably a lot of you in the past, right? Athletes, whatever, that you go out, you haven't been training, the coaches haven't prepared you properly, and they expect you to run like, multiple sprints in the heat, and they'll tell you, they'll basically tell you, yell at you for not doing what you're supposed to be doing, to suck it up. And you're over there, heaving over a trash can because you're exhausted. Basically, they haven't prepared you properly, right? They haven't tested you correctly. They haven't taken your pulse. They haven't done a lot of things, the coaches, to properly determine and assess which one of you are fit and which one of you aren't. And if those who are super fit, they probably could handle those types of runs. Those who aren't fit and maybe haven't been doing the training to prepare for the season need to actually run at a slower pace. Right? So you might have five athletes that are okay with running at the pace that they want. And then you have 5 athletes, 10, 15, depending on the sport, that cannot run at that pace. So they need to actually be paced at a slower pace in order to allow the fitness training to be effective and not get them winded and sick within the first few minutes of the exercise, where now the whole session of training is basically trashed because the coach could not properly assess the athletes, and it's all done with taking pulse, right? So it's taking pulse is really important to be able to know whether you are ready for that pace of running. Number 2 is, let me go back to my notes here. To ensure the training regimen improves fitness levels. What I'd also like you to do, looks like most everyone's on Remind now, okay? So the best thing for you is if you get caught out of the class, you get logged off or whatever, send me a message through Remind, okay? Because I won't see the message. I won't see that if we're on Zoom and I'm sharing a screen, I will not see that that you're off and you can't get back in, because I'm only seeing the screen right now that I'm typing on. So just send me a message to Remind, say, hey, I'm out. Can you let me back in? Done. And then I'll look on my phone and make sure that I plug you back in. Okay, so to ensure the training regimen improves fitness levels. We'll talk about that a little bit later on how that's going to work. You'll do a lab to take your own heart rate pulse. Okay, so 3, to ensure you or your client have rested efficiently after one run, for example, to be able to put out maximal effort on the next run while preventing overexertion. So basically what that means is we need to be able to take pulse. So for example, we take pulse, you do a run, right? You take one lap around the track. Let's say your pulse is 140 beats per minute. And that's high for you. So we need to basically take your pulse again multiple times while you're resting to make sure the pulse comes down to a certain level before you can go and do your next run. Because if you do a run and it's 140, you do another run right away, it's 140, you do another run right away, you don't rest, it's 160, and you're trying to do 10 runs in that fitness training, day, you won't get to the 10 runs, right? If you're not resting effectively between runs, you won't get to the 10 runs. You get to 5 and then you'll be done. 6, you'll be done. Maybe you get overexerted, maybe you feel nauseous, maybe, a lot of different symptoms you'll have of overexertion. So you need to be able to rest effectively, and the only way to know whether we're resting effectively is by taking pulse. Now, not everyone has heart rate monitors. Not everyone has access to be able to take pulse effectively. So the best way to do it is to take pulse with your own wrist. And you can start to do this, right? You can start to do this, now, right?